Kaepernick wore a Fidel Castro t-shirt, and last week Kaepernick complimented Castro for the education and healthcare systems in Cuba. Castro died on Friday. Dolphins linebacker Kiko Alonso, who is a son of a Cuban exile, said about Kaepernick, he doesn't know about the suffering of the Cuban people, the suffering the Cuban people have had. He doesn't have a clue. He's ignorant. Shannon, what's your reaction?
There are certain political figures around the world in our history that you talking about them in supporting terms, nothing good can come out of it. Stalin, Mao Zedong, Mussolini, Hitler. There's nothing that you can say positive about them that will ever be looked upon favorably. That was Colin Kaepernick's first mistake. Kiko Alonso has a very unique perspective. His father is Cuban. He's a Cuban exile. So this is personal to him. And Skip, earlier this year, we kicked off our show talking about police brutality. And people that are directly affected by police brutality have a very unique and different perspective than those who do not. So that's why they say, when you talk about it and you haven't experienced it, you're ignorant to the fact because you're not even trying to hear it. Colin needs to understand he does not need to give people tutorials about world history and its leaders. Because in taking the stance that, talking positive light about Castro, you gloss over the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that he oppressed. You gloss over the people that died at his hands. He was in power for 50 plus years. His brother is now in power. People were fleeing. I don't really think people are fleeing the United States of America because they don't have the right to vote. They don't have the right to dissent. Yeah. They don't have the right to disagree. People were leaving, are still leaving that country. Yeah. People are willing to risk their lives to escape this man. Yeah. And so I don't care if he had the highest literacy rate in the world, what he did to his people. Sometimes they say the good that a man does can supersede any bad he ever did. In this case, this is absolutely wrong. There is nothing he can do good that can transfix or that can gloss over what he did that was so terribly, terribly wrong. And the thing what Colin Kaepernick needs to be careful of, because once he took this stance, a lot of people will try to discredit everything he says. So you really need to be on the up and up. Now you really need to be a looking glass. People need to be able to peer inside of you and know that you are pure. And when you offer a stance like this, don't get caught up into having to have an opinion on everything. Mm-hmm. Hey, you don't have to have an opinion on Castro. You didn't have to tell people that you voted or not. There's a reason why you go into an enclosure. They don't have it like you take an exam and taking the SAT. They don't have it like you go into a lab class in college. There's a reason why it's supposed to be secret. He's opened himself up to criticism. And the criticism he's receiving for this is rightfully so. I agree with Kiko Alonso because this is intimate, this is personal for him, and for Colin to say Castro in any positive light is unacceptable in my book.
Yeah. Did you lose some respect for Colin?
I didn't lose any respect for him, and I know Colin a little bit, and you and I both know Skip. I've been talking to him a little bit, and I just told him, I said, you don't have to comment on everything. No. You don't have to open up and pour your soul out on every subject. Every time someone asks you a question, I understand you want to be an open book, but everything isn't for everybody. Pick and choose what you want people to know and when you want to talk about certain topics. Mm-hmm. But let's keep the focus on what your focus is the police brutality and the oppression of certain minorities in America. Castro, let history judge Castro. But don't you weigh in on a situation that you're not fully up to snuff with. I mean, because last I checked, I don't think he's a historian. I know he's probably done his homework.
He's read pretty good. Yeah, he has.
But if you look at what he's done what Castro did for 50 years, there's no way you can say anything that he's ever done has really been positive.
My bottom line takeaway here is that either Colin is starting to expect too much of himself because it feels like he's been put on a pedestal as a spokesman, almost an international spokesman, or we or people who like Colin are making him feel like he's expected to do more than he should at age 29 while he's still a full-time NFL quarterback. And quick football note, amid all this controversy at Dolphins the other day, he played really well. Maybe played his best game in, 3 years?
He offered a glimpse of what Colin Kaepernick actually used to be like, because he almost passed for 300 and he had 110 yards rushing. So
he did. That now seems insignificant given what we're talking about.
Because we don't even talk about his play. We only talk about this now.
I want to make this point one more time. I still applaud everything Colin Kaepernick has done, the impact he's had on race relations in this country, because it was significant what he did. I didn't love it at the start that he sat for the national anthem, but he opened a bunch of closed eyes in this country.
Yes.
He had very positive impact, and I hope that's not lost in this latest controversy. I'm torn about this because I'm not a historian. I'm not a scholar. I don't know enough about Castro and Mandela and Malcolm X to really get a grip on the big picture here. But I have read a lot about all three of those figures. And when it came to race relations and education, it does seem to me, after all I've read, that Mandela and Malcolm X did find some redeeming value in Fidel Castro, for better or for worse, but they did in their own ways. And when Nelson Mandela finally got out of prison, as most people know about, 27 years in prison in South Africa, one of the first trips abroad that he took was to Cuba to visit Fidel Castro, and he lauded Castro as, and this is a quote, a source of inspiration to all freedom-loving people. That's Nelson Mandela. Now, would Kiko Alonso call him ignorant for making that remark? He probably would and should. Probably would. I don't know. Was Nelson Mandela out of touch? Or I don't know, but he made that. That's a quote.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though. How can he be a beacon of freedom when his people is oppressed?
Yeah. Obviously, many Cubans and Cuban Americans would find that Mandela quote preposterously offensive. Preposterously, because he oppressed people with firing squads and torture. That's all you need to know. Bottom line. So now you're disqualified, right? Okay. Then Castro met with Malcolm X, or Malcolm X met with Castro for about 15 minutes when Castro visited New York City and then went up to Harlem in 1960. Just 15 minutes, which later inspired the pictures that appeared on Colin Kaepernick's T-shirt. And the quote was, "Like minds think alike," saying that Malcolm X and Castro thought alike. So there, that's the T-shirt. Then he was wearing the X hat for Malcolm X. Obviously, this was back in August. And remember, after that meeting, the next year was 1961, the United States attacked Cuba unsuccessfully. And then in 1962, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis that almost led to a war, not only with increasingly communist Cuba, but with the whole communist bloc. That's how we were real close to, under JFK, to World War.
Was the Bay of Pigs,
62. Okay. So that came just on the heels of this meeting with Fidel Castro. So my point is not to get too deep into this, but it's a slippery slope that you're on here with everyone. And yet Malcolm X found redeeming value that Castro was a proponent of race relations, of Cuba, the Afro-Cuban, the rise of those people. And I don't know enough to put it into context, but again, they found redeeming value that no Cuban or Cuban American could now find. And Colin embraced that, maybe to a fault, When the T-shirt of Malcolm X and Castro, and he says, "Like mind think alike," is he talking about that Castro is fighting America and Malcolm X was also fighting America? Could that be the like mind? Because if I'm Colin Kaepernick and he talks about the police brutality, he talks about the oppression that minorities suffer in this country, that should disqualify him from liking Castro, because Castro oppressed his people. He did.
He said Kaepernick said there's voter suppression, that America has suppressed so many minorities throughout the history of this country. Well, Castro not only did that, they're still doing that. So what you're fighting for, people don't enjoy, are fighting for the very same thing in Cuba, but somehow you say America is bad. Some segments of America is bad, but this guy that's doing the exact same thing that you are fighting against is doing the exact same thing to his Cuban people. So that's the part that I didn't understand, and I get the literacy rate. I get the of some black Cubans feel a certain type of way about Fidel Castro. Look, but for Colin Kaepernick, and I get the reporter took it there because he wanted, I guess he tried to expose Colin Kaepernick as being a fraud or a charlatan, however you want to look at it. But Skip, for me, if I'm Colin Kaepernick and I had taken this stance, I don't really think I'm commenting on anything that's not pertaining to my cause. The police brutality and the suppression of the minorities and the discrimination that minorities face in my country.
Yep, you got it.
Now, if President Obama, if other dignitaries, be it in the United States, the Prime Minister of Canada weighed in, or whomever, Germany, or whomever want to weigh in on Castro, have at it. But for me, my focus is, my picture is, this is my canvas. I'm painting on it.
Sure.
And then I'll let other people address that, because until this is finished,
that's correct,
I can't start another canvas. And so if he were to look at it like that, but he's a very open guy, and like I said, I've talked to him on the phone, and I don't want to get into depth, but he wants to be open. He wants people to see him. I'm not a fraud. I'm not doing this for, I got money. I've made money. I'm fine. But I just think what I'm seeing in America is wrong, and I want to stand up for it. I want to call attention to it. But he doesn't want this kind of attention. The kind of attention that he was getting, it was some negative, but it was a lot of positive. I don't really see any positive that can come of you painting Castro in a positive light. I don't see the positive that can come from that.
No, and Joy, you lived in Miami for many years. Your perspective is?
Kaepernick is wrong. There's no excuse for what he did. He claims that he is against systematic oppression.
Right.
That is the definition of Fidel Castro, is systematic oppression. His people were not free. Right. And if Kaepernick claims he's about education and he's about freedom and he's about equality, he would be wise to reach out to Kiko Alonso and apologize and sit down with him and sit down with his father, who's a Cuban exile, and learn about what is actually happening over there and what these people have suffered through. I was in Miami this weekend. There's people partying in the streets and weeping tears of joy of her happiness that he's dead. That doesn't happen when a good person dies. Right. He's a terrible figure in our world's history. The world is better without him. And Kaepernick has no excuse for what he's doing. His message is lost. And I say that as someone who very much supports his protest, his right to protest, and what he's protesting about.
Because if you think about it, he did his homework before he took his stance about sitting for the national anthem. Right. He did his homework, Skip. He asked a lot of important people, a lot of figures that went through the civil rights movement. And if, I'm sure he's talking because he's out there with Dr. Harry Edwards, who organized the summit of the guys. So he was well educated. He was well versed in what he wanted to say and how he wanted to get his point across. I don't think he spent that kind of time studying Castro and was able to articulate or come up with why he wore the shirt and try to explain. For me, when it comes to certain figures, Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini and Tung and Castro, I'm not offering any explanation.
No, you can't win.
History will be their judge. So let history judge them, and I'm not putting a favorable spin. There's nothing to like about these people because they killed. When you kill your own kind, that's unacceptable.
To me, it's almost impossible to believe that he did do any research.
Right.
There's no amount of good that you said that can outweigh the bad that Castro did. So if he had done the minimum amount of research to talk to one person, I have a hard time believing he would wear that shirt or have any excuse for it.
And the only thing that's transpired is that once Castro got sick, he passed the authority to his brother. And in some accounts, his brother is worse than he was. So it's still up under the same dictatorship. Right. So it's not gotten any better. It
triggers a lot of pain for a lot of people. It does. It's unfortunate that Kaepernick caused it. Coming up, he was once one of the most feared defenders in the NFL. Now John Lynch is here to tell you if you can win a Super Bowl with a below-average defense. More Undisputed after the break.